that they weren't the only partners in the world wars which were fought. There were some other very important partners from the Commonwealth countries, and we mustn't forget our history. It's very important. But the member for Tottenham did point out that the importance really is about the relationships, and it was great to hear the member also from Birmingham speaking about his experience of studying in the US, because there's nothing like an experience at university to really hammer home that sense of friendship. Now we have, of course.
Does she agree with me on that point? Also, the staff that work at places like the American State Department, in their consulates and their embassies. I spent 18 months working for the American consulate in Edinburgh, and I was with them on the evening of the election, and I can say how devastated they were at the thought that President Trump was being elected. They are now at the forefront of having to face down the public and work with the public when he is making such abhorrent statements.
I thank the member for that intervention, and I did rather feel a sense of sympathy for the woman who was quite unceremoniously sacked following the imposition of the ban. And having run a local authority myself, I know how heated elected members can get and decide to run into the chamber or the White House and suddenly decide this is the policy of the day, and the poor old staff have to respond and think up how this policy can actually come into effect. And that's why I suppose certain states have actually led to question the actual legal basis for the famous and so-called Muslim ban. Just to comment briefly, Mr. Turner, on the issues that we should be talking about today around tackling international crime and terrorism, working together to address the mass movement of people across the globe, and the reinforcing international policies to combat climate change. Sadly, instead, we're somehow falling into the trap of responding confrontationally to somehow making policy pronouncements by Twitter. And I do hope that we can sort of right the ship again and get back to our more measured way of discussing, debating, and taking a little more time to consider the importance of our foreign policy. Turning briefly to the language of the petition, one concern outlined in the text of the petition focuses on the potential embarrassment a state visit may cause to Her Majesty. However, I fear there is a greater concern that proceeding with the organisation of a state visit whilst President Trump remains intent upon enforcing his travel ban on nationals from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Somalia, Sudan and Yemen would send the wrong message to the White House right now when we're trying to establish a relationship of equals. The international community, and indeed the sizable diasporas from the aforementioned countries, do reside here in our constituencies. But let's be in no doubt, it's not just about the fact that one group's been singled out, it's the fact that any group at all has been singled out, because it's the nature of that discrimination, which is so random, that really strikes fear into the hearts of so many. We know that the German Chancellor Angela Merkel took President to task on the travel ban and how it amounted to a breach of the Refugee Convention. And I think many would expect the same of the Prime Minister of the UK. And as such, I share the disappointment of hundreds of thousands of citizens who felt totally let down by the lack of robust leadership, not least because it sends a worrying message that our foreign policy is overwhelmingly focused and determined by trade. I'd welcome a commitment from the Minister that we have a more rounded foreign policy, not just trade, but the importance of human rights and the importance of national security. Presidents of the United States have often made official visits, as so many have mentioned in the debate today. Maybe they've come for summit meetings or other events within months of their inauguration. However, as has been made so clear today, state visits do require an invitation and historically have taken place over a considerably longer period following the inauguration than the one currently proposed for President Trump. And I thought the member for Rhondda made a very important point that perhaps in a more considered approach, we could ask that one of our committees review our approach to state visits. That would also, I think, protect a Prime Minister who perhaps caught on the hop abroad could say that there was a system of going through something whereby Parliament, she could be protected by Parliament in that way, rather than perhaps setting out in what was rather an unfortunate and risky endeavour. Little was she in the air, and suddenly the ban had been announced. And she was really caught in a position where she had to respond so quickly to that. Whereas had she been able to say, due process, we have a process for deciding these things, and this is, we will let you know, I think that would have been a much more diplomatic, considered and sensible approach. So I do hope that the Minister will comment on the member for Ronda's suggestion. As the member for Hampstead and Kilburn pointed out, the Prime Minister announced the invitation just a week after he took office. So perhaps a little more thought on the timing of it would have been much more helpful, and would perhaps have led to less concern by our own citizens who we can hear outside tonight. The member for Bethnal Green and Bow and the member for Dewsbury have also pointed out quite eloquently the importance of our values around women's rights. And indeed, the member for Bradford West talking about her own constituency, where clearly messages around misogyny and racism were so unwelcome. So to sum up, Mr Turner, we do share the concern of so many parliamentary colleagues and indeed millions of people across the UK over both the timing and the context in which the invitation for this state visit was issued. And I'd be keen to know whether the Minister himself, who we all know is an honourable man, had any personal discussions with the Foreign Secretary or indeed the Prime Minister over the timing of the invitation, the designation of the visit as a state visit, given that he himself believes the rhetoric around this travel ban unacceptably anti-Muslim, and I quote him. Secondly, I'd like to give the Minister the opportunity to admit that extending the honour of state visit in the current context was an error of judgment in essence. To conclude, the position is clear. We are opposed to Mr Trump being honoured with a state visit so early in his presidency, and certainly whilst he remains intent on enforcing this discriminatory travel ban. And should it go ahead, I'm strongly opposed to offering him the honour of addressing both Houses of Parliament in Westminster Hall so early. At this point, I would like to associate myself with the remarks of the Speaker of the House of Commons, and indeed the sentiments of the early day motion 890, tabled by my excellent honourable friend, the member for Cardiff South and Penrith. I have one more sentence, Mr.
In that case, please.
I'm immensely proud that members today have reaffirmed Parliament's strong role and commitments to the principles of the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary, as well as our opposition to racism and sexism. Thank you, Mr. Turner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Turner, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And in response to the two petitions which have triggered this debate, and having listened to the arguments on both sides, I'd like to set out the position of Her Majesty's Government and explain the thinking behind it. The state visit, as people have mentioned today, is a uniquely British construct. No other country is able to offer a state visit in quite the same way as we do. It is distinctively British. And over the course of her reign, Her Majesty has hosted over 100 of them. All such visits are a rare and prestigious occasion, but they are also our most important diplomatic tool. They enable us to strengthen and influence those international relationships that are of the greatest strategic importance to this country and even more widely to other parts of the world as well. And in answer to the Honourable Lady who speaks for the front bench of the opposition, recommendations for state visits are made on the advice of the government through the Royal Visits Committee, not by Parliament as such. That committee is attended by representatives of the Royal Household, Downing Street, the Cabinet Office, the Department for Trade, and is chaired by the Foreign Office. Mr. Turner, in an uncertain and increasingly dangerous world, the ability to work closely with key countries is of critical importance. Strong alliances and close relationships are a central stabilizing pillar for world security. And this is an increasingly unstable world. Yet always within that world and throughout modern history, the United States and the United Kingdom have worked together side by side to bring peace and security during times of danger and uncertainty. And especially with the world as it is today, that's why a state visit matters so much, because put simply, diplomacy matters. The relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States is built around a common language, the common principles of freedom and democracy,